Hello, this is Taylor Elwood, your mad scientist and magical experimenter, and I thought this week I would share one of the ways that I end up discovering things that I want to experiment on when I'm reading books and learning in general. So one of the daily practices I do each day is a spatial consecration ritual where I go to each direction and the four directions, and I do a call to the archangels and basically invoke their energy and presence. And it's something I learned from R.J. Stewart. Well, recently I've been reading Temple Magic by William G. Gray, and in it, let me see if I can find the right page. I've got it like dog tagged. Here it is. You probably won't be able to see this, but maybe you will. There's a correspondence chart, and lo and behold, there are three other things outside of three other archangels that are outside of the four primary directions. So I recently emailed RJ and I said, "Hey, RJ, I found this, and do you think that is it possible that with the spatial consecration prayer that we should include these other three archangels and possibly do something to include them? Would that include the above, the below, and the center?" And his answer was a little ambivalent. He said, depending on what you wanted to do, that you certainly could experiment that way if you wanted to, but that he felt that the spatial consecration prayer basically accounted for those things because of the fact that it forms a sphere. And I'll admit, I was like, okay, yeah, that's all right, but I want to see what I can do with this. So what I've decided to do is do an experiment. I am going to work with each of the three archangels. I'm going to explore the correspondences related to those archangels, and I'm going to come up with similar prayers. And I'm basically going to call this the temporal consecration prayer. So we'll have the spatial, which accounts for the space, and then we'll have the temporal. Above, below, and the center, but also, if we want to look at it from a linear perspective, past, present, and future. Or I guess I should say future, past, present, however you want to look at it. But I'm going to do that and experiment with it for the purposes of just seeing what happens. So really here, how I came up with this experiment is I'm reading this material and I'm saying, aha, there's a gap here. There's a gap in what I know and what I've learned and what's been presented to me. And in this case I checked with the person who I have tons of respect for. I want to make that very clear, tons of respect for RJ. And got his answer. And he said, hey, you can go ahead and experiment if you want to, that's fine. It's up to you. And so I'm going to go ahead and experiment. I'd go ahead and experiment anyway, regardless of whether I had someone's blessing or not, because it's really not about, your magical journey isn't about someone else, it's about you. But I feel like there's this gap, and I want to explore it and see what occurs with it. And so I'll probably be sharing some of that work on future videos here, because I think it'd be neat to actually catalog, how an experiment unfolds. And that's not something I've really done here before. So I think I will go ahead and do that and kind of share with you what I'm learning and what's happening as a result. And I'll admit, this is part of how I go about experimenting. I read material, I look at it, and then I start asking myself questions like, what's missing? Where's the gap? What can I do here? Or I'll read something and I'll like what they share, but then I'll be like, how can I take it further? Like, I was learning about this thing with inner silence or inner sound, and how you could plug your ears up if you want to create this sense of inner sound. And I thought, it would be really cool to actually explore that too. So I'm going to get some earplugs and experiment with that as well. And of course, I'll be talking about that too, because there are some definite space-time magic possibilities here with both of these techniques that I'm going to develop, or that I'm going to explore and flesh out further in my own in the directions that I want to take it. The chief takeaway I want you to come away with here is that no one's word or authority is final when it comes to your spiritual path. And that's important because if you're going to experiment, you have to accept that at some point you're going to go and do things that someone else wouldn't think of doing, or you're going to find that there's something missing in your opinion from what they've shared. And you're going to want to go out there and discover it yourself. And your purpose of you doing it isn't to, say, oh, so-and-so doesn't know what they're talking about. I mean, you got to respect where you've gotten the information from, in my opinion. You've always got to be respectful of that. The point of it, though, is that you recognize there's something there. And it may not appeal to anyone else, and that's not the point. It's about you. It's about your spiritual journey. You may want to share it with other people. I highly recommend it, see what they say or do. But the point is that you want to go out there and explore it. And so, really, the takeaway for you here is that you don't want to settle for anyone else's word. Consult with other people. Like if you have the fortune of having a magical teacher, consult with them. Share with them what you're thinking. But if they try and discourage you, if anything, that means you're definitely onto something. And I'll say, in all fairness, RJ did not discourage me. He's like, hey, if you want to go ahead and do this, go ahead and do it. But you may find in some cases, and I would certainly say that myself, in past experience with other people who were quote-unquote teachers in my lives for however brief a time it was, and it was a brief time in both cases, I had these people who basically tried to discourage me. And if anything, it just pushed me to explore more because I realized I was onto something if they felt uncomfortable about it. But sometimes you'll have an awesome teacher who won't feel that way, and so you just say, okay, great. What worked for that teacher is what works, but you also recognize that there's some potential other directions and avenues, and so you choose to explore that. That's actually part of how the tradition is furthered. A tradition is developed further when people discover gaps that are missing. And yes, people in the tradition may not fully agree with your interpretation or your choice. They might say, what works, this already works, we don't really need to go any further. And fair enough. But that doesn't mean that the work you're doing can't be part of that tradition. It just means that some people may not fully agree with it. And they'll have their reasons, and so it goes. Alright, well, that's enough of me babbling. Anyway, I just wanted to share with you how I go about figuring out what kind of experiments I do. And we're going to actually explore this in more depth over the next few weeks, I think. Because I think it would be really cool to explore what happens if we do develop an alternate approach. We're gonna develop the temporal consecration prayers, basically, and just see what happens with it. Alright folks, if you have a comment, feel free to leave below and subscribe over here on the T.